me, Mr. President. I think other than you, I've been the biggest proponent of TrumpRx.com. And the reason for that is Republicans want cheaper drugs, independents want cheaper drugs, Democrats want cheaper drugs, and together, I think we're going to do something special. What makes Cost Plus Drugs different is that when you click through TrumpRx to our site, not only will you see a great price, but you'll see our actual cost and that we only mark it up 15%. And what makes this incredible, Mr. President, all the volume and all the people that are going to come from the site, as our volumes go up, our costs go down, which means we'll be ending up charging less to people over a period of time. So this is a special announcement. This is a special partnership. 559 of those drugs are ours, so we're really excited to be part of this. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll turn it over to Chris Klump.
Do you regret supporting former Vice President?
I'm not going into my politics at all. Yes, sir.
So Mark Cuban just walked into the White House. Mark Cuban, a guy who spent years being a vocal critic of Trump, a Democrat-leaning billionaire who literally made his name by going on television and disagreeing with conservative policy. Just stood next to the president and announced a partnership on lowering prescription drug cost. And here's what matters about that moment. This isn't some theoretical political disagreement anymore. This isn't Cuban disagreeing on tax policy or a healthcare philosophy from his mansion. This is a guy with credibility on the left admitting that Trump's approach to drug pricing actually works. The media's reaction to this tells you everything you need to know about what they actually care about. And it's not whether your family can afford medicine, it's about who gets the credit for solving the problem. So let me break down what Trump RX actually is, because you're going to hear a lot of noise about it, and most of that noise is designed to confuse you into ignoring something that directly affects your wallet. Trump RX is a government website. That's it. It's not the government manufacturing drugs. It's not socialism. It's not a government takeover of the pharmaceutical industry. It's a website that provides price transparency on prescription drugs. The government is literally doing one job, showing you the actual prices you can get if you know where to look. That's the entire innovation here. You log on, you see what drugs cost, and you can make an informed decision about where to buy them. Now, in Cuban's company, Cost Plus Drugs, is integrated into that website, and here's how it works. And this is where the real world impact comes in. When you go to Cost Plus Drugs through Trump RX, you are not seeing some inflated price with 15 layers of middleman markups. You're seeing the actual manufacturing cost. And Cuban's company marks it up by 15%. 15%. That's the entire business model. Cut out the middleman who've been inflating prices for decades, show people what things actually cost, and charge a reasonable margin. The result is what happens when you eliminate the capacity that's been suffocating the free market. Cancer medications that cost $2,000 drop to $17. Not metaphorically, actually $17. That's not an exaggeration from some activist group. That's the actual price difference between going through the normal system with all its hidden markups and going through transparency. Now, think about what that means for the families who actually live in the real world. 1/3 of Americans are cutting back on essential food and utilities to pay for prescriptions. 1/3. That means people are choosing between feeding their families and getting antibiotics. They're choosing between paying for electricity and keeping their blood pressure medication in stock. That's the real world. That's not healthcare policy debate, that's survival. And here's the thing that should make this completely non-controversial. Republicans want cheaper drugs, Democrats want cheaper drugs, independents want cheaper drugs. Everyone wants this. The bipartisan reality isn't even close. It's unanonymous. People across the entire political spectrum are being squeezed by prescription costs. So logically, you expect the media to celebrate when two people from opposite sides of the political divide actually build something that solves the problem, which is what most successful businesses are. You give a service that solves a problem at the convenience of the customer, which they're willing to exchange their money for that problem to be solved. But that's not what's happening when it comes to this whole thing of customers being happy and celebrating when two people on the opposite sides of political divide, because it's a meltdown, right? And the meltdown that I want to show you is from The View. with the lunch ladies, I like to call them. You got Whoopi Goldberg and et cetera, Sonny Hostin and things like that. So instead of talking about results, here's what happened on major media platforms. One host immediately went with the "you lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas" argument, basically saying that just by association with Trump, the entire initiative becomes tainted and corrupt. The claim was so extreme it bordered on medical. The suggestion was that people would literally die because his name is attached to something that lowers their drug costs. They would die because the whole thing isn't legit and corrupt because Trump is involved in it. So think about that logic for a second. You're telling Americans that it's safer to pay $2,000 for medication than to pay $17 because of who's involved in making a cheaper option available. That's the argument being made on national television to millions of viewers. Then, when that didn't land, the host pivoted to attacking Trump's business record. He was called a failed businessman, and this is where the disconnect between rhetoric and reality becomes impossible to ignore. Trump's worth billions of dollars. He was worth billions of dollars before he ran for president. The bankruptcy argument is factually inaccurate. Yes, some of his businesses filed for bankruptcy protection, which is a legal tool used in business all the time. But his net worth contradicts the quote unquote failed businessman narrative entirely. Yet, that's what gets repeated because it sounds good and feels right to a certain audience, not because it's grounded in actual fact. What I have learned is actually bankruptcy for the wealthy individuals is actually a loophole that actually protects their actual money from the business. And bankruptcy may sound like a failed business person if you fall into the narrative, but really it's a loophole for the business and this whole, the business that failed, that wasn't very successful when it came to cash flow and profit. It protects the individual's monies from the business monies that happen to fall into sink. So you file for bankruptcy, from my understanding, and family, you can correct me down in the comments. You file bankruptcy because obviously the business isn't doing well to sustain itself. And if you were to combine your monies with that business money, then obviously you will be owed the debts from that business. But since the business is being self-sustainable on its own and you're separating your monies from the business, that means the business is filing bankruptcy because it's no longer successful or lucrative and it's not being able to sustain loans or whatever that took place in regards of getting that business up and running. So everything just fell face plant down and, the business isn't lucrative to have money. So whatever cost that it came with associating that business, you file for bankruptcy because whatever that came with it associated with it obviously couldn't be paid for. So with that being said, bankruptcy is not always quote unquote I'm broke, because for wealthy people and big businesses, it can be a legal reset button. The strategy is usually separate the risky business from personal wealth. Like I said, you're protecting your own personal monies from the business money, cash flow. Use bankruptcy to stop creditors, renegotiate debt, keep valuable assets, and continue operating. So if you look at it in plain English, right? For somebody who don't know this, a rich person may own business A, business B, real estate, retirement accounts, trust, investments, and cash. If business A fails, they may put business A into bankruptcy, not their whole life. So creditors go after that business, but the owners, other companies, and personal assets may be protected if everything was legally separated. That's why a lot of times the best bet for a tax advantage is if you have a business, you make yourself a W-2 employee and you pay yourself. So the biggest tool is using Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is reorganization, because it lets a business keep operating while it works out a court-approved plan to repay, reduce, delay, or restructure debts. So the U.S. courts describe Chapter 11 as a process often used by businesses that will keep operating while repaying creditors through a reorganization plan. And another major weapon is automatic stay. Once bankruptcy is filed, most lawsuits, collections, foreclosures, repressions, and creditor actions get paused. That gives the debtor breathing room and forces creditors to deal inside the bankruptcy court instead of everyone attacking at once. So the rich use it strategically like this. They separate assets before a problem happens. They use LLCs, corporations, holding companies, trusts, insurance, retirement accounts, etc., etc. The point is, this business failed, not my whole personal life. Bankruptcy generally pulls in the debtor's property, meaning the asset owned by the person or company that filed. Not automatically everything is connected to the owner. So they use debt as leverage. Instead of paying everything immediately, they file bankruptcy and they say, here's what we can realistically pay. Creditors may accept less because getting something through a plan can be better than fighting and getting nothing. Then they keep the profitable part and cut the bad part. A company may close weak locations, reject bad leases or contracts, sell certain assets, reduce the debt, and keep the core business alive. That can protect future income because certain parts of that business may not be working, but the other part may. They protect their own personal net worth by risking business money, not personal money. So a smart, wealthy person may avoid personally guaranteeing every loan. So if the business collapsed, the lender may be stuck with the business assets, meaning the business, it can be a commercial property, whatever, not the owner's house, brokerage account, or the company's. So they use bankruptcy to buy time. Time is power. If creditors are about to sue, seize assets, or force for sale, bankruptcy can slow everything down and allow control, reconstruction instead of panic selling. And they negotiate from a stronger position. Without bankruptcy, one creditor can chase them aggressively. In bankruptcy, creditors are grouped, ranked, and handled through court rules that makes the process more organized and can force creditors to compromise. So, and here's the important part. They are not legally allowed to just hide money. So moving assets to a spouse, family member, friend, or fake company right before filing can be treated as fraudulent transfer. So, and also lying in bankruptcy, like hiding assets and filing, fake paperwork, that's bankruptcy fraud. And the Department of Justice can get into that because Department of Justice says federal law prohibits using bankruptcy filings or false statements as a scheme to defraud. So you look at it like this: poor/middle class view, bankruptcy means I failed and lost everything. Rich business view, bankruptcy is a legal tool to reconstruct your debt, stop creditors, protect the good assets, cut the bad debt, and keep wealth moving forward. So the rich don't protect wealth by magically avoiding consequences. They protect wealth by planning before the crisis, keeping assets legally separated, using business entities or properties or whatever, and avoiding personal guarantees and using Chapter 11 to negotiate instead of getting wiped out. Because if you can just reconstruct the debt because you took on too much debt or you thought the business could expand as much as it could, but it doesn't, and you need to scale back, you can renegotiate that debt, but still keep the business up and running. All right. So I wanted to break that down because that is something I learned, and that's entirely important. And this is where you're going to see them say something out of ignorance, and I don't want my viewers to be ignorant. I actually want to inform you. And if you got some value from this video, give this video a big thumbs up. But when you see that, and that's why it's important for you guys to understand, yes, Trump filed bankruptcy, but he used it as a legal tool. And yet that's what's being repeated in this clip with The View because it sounds good and feels right to a certain audience, not because it's grounded in actual fact. So check it out.
Take a look.
I want to thank the leaders of several major pharmacies and generic drug makers who are partnering with us on this effort, including the co-founder of Cost Plus Drugs, Mark Cuban. Mark, thank you very much. Mark, looking good, Mark. Come here, Mark. Nice to meet you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We have the same thing, one thing in common. We want to make people better and keep them wealthy, right?
I think other than you, I've been the biggest proponent of TrumpRx.com. And the reason for that is Republicans want cheaper drugs, independents want cheaper drugs, Democrats want cheaper drugs, and together, I think we're going to do something special.
Okay.
First of all, you lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas.
Correct.
All right, that's number one.
Correct.
And you know, I like Mark Cuban. I've always liked him, but this is a mistake. And once Trump puts his name on prescriptions, we're all going to die. Okay?
Yeah.
He put his name on the Trump shuttle, the Trump vodka, the Trump University, the Trump hotel,
Trump steaks,
and my
too.
favorite, the casinos that all went bankrupt.
Yeah.
The drugs
Do not go there,
The drugs
Mark.
don't actually have his name. They're existing drugs.
Whatever.
It's a
If he's
marketplace, but-
involved with it.
No,
I literally-
have to push
Wait,
back,
wait,
yeah. A
what is
medication that I had to take for IVF is a 10th of the price on Trump RX. I don't, whatever, it's tacky that his name is on it. Mark Cuban has dedicated his life to bringing down prescription drug costs. The average family, 1/3 of Americans cut back on essential foods and utilities to be able to cover their prescription drug costs. You're not going to convince me that just because Trump's involved, we should be like, screw it, don't bring down prescription drug costs.
If he's going to make a profit out
Correct.
of it, don't take it.
I completely agree with that.
Americans
I
are
agree with you, Joy, on this
struggling.
one.
No.
He is a failed businessman.
Right.
And if you heard what he said, we both want to make people wealthy. He didn't say
So
healthy.
I should pay
He
10
said-
times more
he
for
said
my
wealthy, which
medication.
means to me that there's something in it for him. This is
Right.
not a well-intentioned
The presidency
person.
is something he
intentions-
cashes in on Sunday, but what this does
No,
is it helps
Sarah, he
American
is not a
people.
well-intentioned person.
I
He
just-
is not doing this out of
You
the
guys
goodness
are
of his
naive.
heart.
Nobody thinks
doing
he's-
this to
Wow.
make
No
money.
one thinks he's doing
Joy,
it out
we're
of
the
goodness of
wealthiest
his heart.
country and we pay the most for
There
drugs.
could be
the people
shortcuts
that are
involved.
literally suffering illnesses and cannot pay for their medicine, I can't think of a sicker business
okay,
model. Bring
there
down
are-
the prices, and if you're going to get results on this, call it Donald Trump
There are
medicine. I don't care what you call it.
There are countries all over this world, especially in Scandinavia, that have national health insurance.
Correct.
They do
Yeah,
not
they're
want to
smaller
have
than
that.
New
That
Jersey,
would bring
like
down the
America.
cost of drugs and
Yes,
health care.
yes.
But in the
But they don't want that.
They
They
have
call that
concepts of a
socialism.
plan, Joy,
Okay,
and
but-
Family, that wouldn't bring down the cost of drugs because you have government intervention. Every time you involve government, the simple fact is the costs go up because government wants to add their tax to it. And then on top of it, when government intervention gets involved, then also you're going to pay, if you do pay, any type of cost that comes with it on top of what the government calls themselves helping you with. Do you not realize that that actually brings up the cost of living or makes the cost of living rise? Because the government is going to be the individual or operate in regards of creating a tax incentive while the simple fact of making sure that they provide the drugs. So if I'm telling you that she's talking about universal health care and that will bring down the cost of the prescription drugs. Okay, so why isn't it helping with Obamacare? Ain't that government intervention in a way? Affordable care, affordable prescriptions, lowering the cost of prescriptions, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm saying is the cost goes to, if it doesn't go, if you're looking at it and you think the government is helping you, the reality is the rise of cost of living is happening because the government is paying for it. But then the simple fact is if the government is paying for it, they're going to streamline it in a way where, okay, we are helping individuals with national health care and we're also lowering the cost of prescriptions, but also it's rising our national debt because we're taking on the bulk and the expense of whatever these pharmaceutical companies charge us as a government, and then the government needs to get that money back, which then goes back to a regular everyday American Joe, who then has to pay more taxes to keep the government from providing this universal national health care and also providing this affordable drugs, quote unquote, that will bring down health prescription drug costs that she just mentioned. So I don't understand the logic of Joy Behar. I really don't. It's just ignorance. I don't know if she ever ran a business, but that was just stupid. I'm sorry.
Now this is a
You
plan.
are so
I'm going to go with
naive, the
it.
two
In
of
the
you.
mean-
Wow.
so you're
The two of you are so naive.
You're saying,
So
in the-
naive.
if I may speak, so you're saying that in the meantime, while he remains in office for the next 2 years, people should just not have access to cheaper drugs because Trump put
They
his name
should.
on it?
Anything he
But
touches is
that's-
tainted. I don't trust it.
Today, I can literally order a prescription drug that I need for a 10th of the cost because of this, and it's not just
Don't
giving
believe
Trump credit.
anything he says.
It's
Alyssa.
real. Go literally
he's a
look it
liar.
up. It is right there. I can get Follistim.
What I wish they had done collectively.
There he is now.
Was that my
Breaking the wall.
I wish collectively they had found a way to make pharmacies where people could go in and get what they wanted, because generic drugs should be cheaper.
Yeah, of course.
And that was the whole thing with Mark Cuban. I think what people are responding to is the fact that his name
Correct.
is really
and his affiliation with
well, no, I think if it had been Mark Cuban's name on it, we would not be having this discussion.
Because anything he touches is tainted.
But because people have been really sort of screwed over over the last several years. I think that's what you're responding to. I don't think anybody's responding to not wanting cheaper drugs. I think it's responding
But I think it's easy to say it at this table because we can all afford our drugs.
I want to know what's in it for Donald Trump.
But even if, honestly,
let me finish my point. And
I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna start off with this quote and then I'm gonna, finish up. But I remember this quote from Ronald Reagan. Ronaldo Reagan. He basically said, "We don't have inflation because the people are living too well. We have inflation because the government is living too well." And I'm saying that to say that the more government intervention that happens, the costs go up. Not to mention that also I just covered a Walgreens video. You guys should go check that out. But the simple fact is, when we Medicaid, when it comes to prescription and drug costs, first of all, Walgreens don't get the bulk of the money or don't get paid as much as for someone who paid cash for the prescription drugs. Because the simple fact is, the way it's being lowered is through the incentive of Medicaid paying for it, which in your mind as a citizen, you think you're getting it for free, but you're actually paying for yourself through the cost of inflation and higher taxes. So what I'm saying is, the more handouts you get, you realize the higher the cost of living gets in. Everything government touches, going to this quote, which is the reason why the government is living too well, because they're streamlining it and they're actually raising the cost of living and the national debt as a country because they keep putting their hands in things, and the government is living well based on these things that are being spent on to tax the American people, because it's always going to come down to the everyday average Joe. So all these programs that you think are lowering the cost, the money has to get somewhere to justify for the program to exist. And once you understand that, if government keeps putting their tentacles in things, you realize that the cost of living keep going up and things keep going up, because the reality is the government wants that back. Uncle Sam wants his cut 10 times more. And plus anything else they splurge on, they have to make sure that they have extra money to cover other things in regards to that. So when is there ever going to be a non-stopping of constant taxation? So in this case, this is a phenomenal business model because it cuts out the middleman who you have to pay whatever price tag they adjust or whatever the manufacturer wants to, let alone bill the government in the name of Medicaid. And then the government is like, okay, we want to get that money back times 10. And then you get taxed to death. So now if you're cutting out the government from being involved and you're actually buying for that manufacturer, it cuts the cost. So that's why I wanted to say that quote from Ronaldo Reagan. Now, this, right? They obviously they like the business model, but they don't like the business models attached to Trump, which is immature. But when you can't attack the policy itself, you attack the person. And when you can't accurately attack the person's record, you just say things that aren't true and move forward. But here's where it gets interesting. When one of the hosts was directly confronted with the fact that she personally got access, speaking to her experience, not caring if it's Trump name attached to it or not, her experience, you heard, to a medication for a tenth of the cost through Trump RX, conversation shifted again. Suddenly, it wasn't about whether the policy works. She already admitted it does by using it herself. It became about Mark's Cuban attention. And if Mark Cuban's name on it, it wouldn't be a problem. The focus moved from outcomes to purity. Is he doing this for the right reasons? Does he have good intentions? Is there profit involved when it comes to Trump? And this is the classic dodge when you can't actually argue against the results. If the results are good and undeniable, attack the motivation. But the motivation is irrelevant to whether someone's family can afford medicine. A policy either lowers drug costs or it doesn't. Your family either saves money or it doesn't. The character of the person delivering it doesn't change whether your kid gets antibiotics. Then came the moment that revealed everything. Once the host said it directly, if it had been Mark Cuban's name on it, we wouldn't be having this discussion. That's the admission right there. They support the policy, like they like what it does. They just hate who delivered it. This isn't policy analysis. It's pure tribal politics. And here's the thing that makes this particularly revealing. These are multimillionaires. They don't experience prescription drug costs. They don't cut back on food to afford medication. They don't skip doses to make prescription last longer. So it's easy for them to attack something that would fundamentally change life for working families because that change doesn't affect them personally. The privilege is almost shocking. They claim to care deeply about healthcare access and affordability. That's been a centerpiece of their political advocacy for years. But when an actual tool for healthcare access appears, they actively discourage people from using it. They're telling their audience not to access cheaper drugs. That's not disagreement with policy. That's choosing ideology over your audience's material welfare. Here's where it gets lost in all the noise and by who said what on television. There's actually a legitimate reason why price transparency matters so fundamentally. It's not some abstract economic principle. It's about how markets actually function when people have information versus when they don't. Right now, pharmaceutical manufacturers, hospital administrators, and insurance company executives all know the real cost of everything. They know exactly what a drug costs to manufacture. They know what hospital actually pays for supplies, and they understand the entire supply chain and where the real expenses live. But you don't. The consumer, the person whose life depends on getting that medication, is operating in the dark. And that's called information asymmetry. And it's one of the foundational problems that breaks markets. When one side of a transaction knows everything and the other side gets nothing, the side with information wins every time. That's not capitalism. That's a rigged game. And when the government steps in and forces transparency, it's not attacking capitalism, it's actually defending capitalism by making sure the game isn't rigged. When people have information, they make better decisions. They shop around, they push back on prices, they demand value. That's how free markets are supposed to work, right? Opacity breeds monopoly. It breeds corruption. It breeds the exact kind of price inflation we're seeing in healthcare. So that's my whole point of that situation. And they bank on your ignorance. And opacity is just a lack of transparency. So transparency is generally a constitutional principle in the sense that it strengthens the system the Constitution is built on. Informed citizens making informed decisions about their own lives and their own money. Without information, there's no real choice. There's just surrender. Look at what that opacity produces across the entire healthcare system. Hospital charge you $50 for a bottle of water because they can. They charge $300 for a bandage that costs maybe $1 to manufacture. Insurance companies receive these inflated bills from hospitals, then dump the cost onto the patients through deductibles and copays. Nobody knows what anything actually costs because it's deliberately hidden. This isn't a free market functioning. This is a broken system pretending to be capitalism while it operates entirely on lack of transparency and asymmetry. The entire structure is designed so that people with power and information keep extracting value from people without power and without information. When institutions prioritize narrative over actual results, they're not just making a media mistake. They actively defending that broken system. Because if the media actually focus on outcomes, if they actually reported on whether policies work instead of who proposed them, the entire structure of institutional trust shifts. People start believing that their interest matters more than political tribes, and they start thinking about actual solutions instead of team loyalty. And institutions have built themselves on the assumption that tribal loyalty is stronger than self-interest. And that's their entire business model now. When media outlets attack good policies because of who delivers them, they're not trying to educate you. They're trying to maintain a mental framework where you care about more political affiliation than your own wallet. And here's the consequence. Working families stop trusting what they hear. If you can't trust a media outlet to report honestly about a policy that directly affects whether you can afford medication, why would you trust what they say about anything else? That's why I do what I do and give you the information and make this content. Their credibility collapses with the people most affected by this pattern, or these issues, I should say. The erosion of institutional trust isn't just a media problem, it spreads everywhere. This pattern of attacking good policy because of partisan affiliation infects immigration debates, border security, education reform, energy policy. Everywhere, results should matter more than rhetoric. And when that happens across enough institutions for long enough, people stop believing in the possibility of good governance at all. They assume everything is just tribes fighting for power. And the precedent or the tone being set right now is clear. If Democrats eventually take power and keep Trump RX, but simply remove Trump's name from it, they'll prove the policy was always good. But the media will already have destroyed this credibility with the exact people who needed to trust them the most. A policy either works or it doesn't. That's the foundation of what should matter here. Trump RX lowers prescription drug costs. That's measurable. That's observable. You can go to the website right now and see lower prices. Then you'll pay through normal channels. Whether you like Trump's personality, whether you agree with his political positions on other issues, whether you think his past business ventures were sound, none of that changes whether a medication costs $2,000 or $17,000. The person delivering a result is separate from whether the result is real. And we somehow lost that basic distinction. Accountability in government should be straightforward. Did the policy achieve what it was supposed to achieve? If yes, it gets continued support and expansion. If no, it gets reformed or replaced. The person in charge is almost irrelevant to that calculation. But that's how institutional analysis works anymore. Well, that's not how institutional analysis works anymore. That should be how it works, but it doesn't work like that anymore, is my point. The focus is entirely on personality and tribal affiliation or party affiliation because he's a Republican, because he's Trump, whatever the case may be. When media figures actively discourage their audience from accessing cheaper medication to maintain a political narrative, they're making a choice. They're choosing the coherence of their Democrat story or their tribe story over the material welfare of the people watching. That's not journalism, that's activism. And it's the kind of activism that costs people, real people, real money. So when she's saying, what is Trump getting out of it? What are you getting out of this of actually being affiliated with a party that's not being transparent, keeping individuals in the dark with their medication and letting insurance companies and hospital jack up bills and charge them whatever, even though they're paying cheap, the actual cost of the medicine is actually really cheap for the manufacturer. But now it's being exposed, and now it ditches putting the power into health insurance companies and the power of hospitals to charge whatever they want, putting Americans in debt when it comes to medical debt, because you can't erase that off of your record, just like college education with loans. So what are you supposed to do? So when Trump said it helps keep people wealthy in a form of being informed to actually make an informed decision that only saves money and keeps money in their wallet, reserves more of their monies to be not on survival mode, but thrival mode, and also get on the medication they need to live. So when you look at that, and real journalism is reporting on outcomes, it means acknowledging when opposing sides accomplish something worthwhile. It means saying this policy was proposed by someone I disagree with on most other things and appears to be working. So let's examine whether we should expand it or keep it in place. That kind of honest analysis requires setting aside the need to be consistently right about people, focusing instead on whether systems are actually functioning. The people most affected by this debate don't care about cable news narratives. They care about whether their kids, like I said, can get antibiotics without financial devastation. They care about whether a prescription refill means choosing between medicine and groceries. They're not thinking about whether Trump or Mark Cuban or anyone else involved deserves credit. They're thinking about their bank accounts and their survival. Constitutionally, the executive branch exists to execute policy that benefits the public. The legislative branch creates the law. The judicial branch interprets it. When the executive successfully implements something that objectively improves lives for citizens, the media's responsibility is to report that accurately, not to suppress it, not to discourage people from using it, not to undermine it because of whose entire apparatus is operating in good faith. That erosion of trust becomes a real danger because nobody believes anything, not just the things they should be skeptical about, but the things they should actually care about. The choice in front of us is stark. We either believe institutions, let me backtrack. The choice in front of us is stark. We either build institutions and media ecosystems where good ideas get support regardless of their origin, or we keep a system where tribal loyalty, Democrat, Republican affiliation, whatever party you support, loyalty matters more than whether Americans can actually afford to live. Those aren't compatible. You can't have both. Demand more from the institutions you consume. Demand that media outlets report on outcomes instead of personalities, and demand that your elected officials support good policy even when opponents propose it. That goes to your governors, your mayors, local legislators. Demand that the institutions you trust prioritize your material interests over their narrative consistency. That's not extreme. That's baseline accountability. So the entire Mark Cuban moment comes down to one question. Do our institutions care more about results or rhetoric? One host on this show, The View, literally benefited from cheaper medication through Trump RX, but still attacked the program. Right? That's the clearest possible evidence. Or I should say they attacked her for explaining the program she benefited from. And if you're someone paying thousands for a drug you could access at a fraction of the cost, you need to ask yourself, are you going to let cable news narratives determine your own healthcare decisions? And drop a comment and tell me whether you think institutions should prioritize results or partisanship, being loyal to their party over the best interests of the American people. I'll pin the best response. Subscribe if you actually want analysis that focuses on what works instead of who gets the credit. Catch you next one. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede the hate. Give this video a big thumbs up. It helps crush that YouTube algorithm. On that note, family, peace.